The lights on a Marvel set don't leave much room for mistakes. Jonathan Majors learned that early, and the world noticed. By the time he was cast as a key villain in one of the biggest franchises on the planet, he wasn't just acting. He was being positioned. Every interview, every festival appearance, every carefully curated magazine profile was adding layers to a narrative. The next A-list superstar. The industry doesn't just create stars, it manufactures inevitability. And inevitability carries a hidden fragility because the higher the projection, the thinner the margin for human error. Contracts tighten, brands expand, public scrutiny compounds, every private misstep becomes a public risk. Major's talent had always been obvious. Stage-trained, emotionally intense, disciplined. Critics praised his depth. Audiences resonated with his magnetic presence. In smaller films, he commanded attention. In blockbusters, he was positioned as indispensable, but the machinery that elevates someone like Majors has little tolerance for unpredictability. Momentum is carefully engineered. The path from critical darling to franchise anchor is lined with strategy, agents arranging press cycles, managers controlling visibility, studios planning long-term arcs. Every word, every photograph, every choice calculated for maximum leverage. Major's rise wasn't accidental, it was curated, and curated ascent has one glaring risk. When anything breaks the narrative, everything else feels unstable. By early 2023, Hollywood wasn't just celebrating him, they had invested in him. Not just money, not just marketing, narratives, future phases of franchises, merchandising, fan loyalty, cultural capital. That level of investment changes how an industry reacts. Not with empathy, not with patience, with strategy. Then came the collision. Reported domestic dispute, police involvement, an arrest that reframed him in the public eye practically overnight. The narrative accelerated faster than facts could keep up. One week, he was the future of superhero cinema. The next, he was a legal headline. Momentum doesn't pause for personal life. It doesn't slow because someone needs privacy. It doesn't accommodate the nuance of human behavior. The machinery of modern Hollywood moves differently when perception shifts. Contracts aren't just agreements anymore, they are shields. Studio strategy rooms become tense war rooms. Executives measure fallout in PR points, franchise risk, and shareholder anxiety. Talent once celebrated is recalibrated as liability. Majors had been built as a narrative bet, a long-term investment in a projected icon. Once the legal situation surfaced, the calculus changed instantly. The industry doesn't punish truth, it punishes uncertainty. Because uncertainty costs money, momentum costs loyalty, and at the top tiers of Hollywood, control is everything. Courtroom cameras and police reports didn't just document a legal case, they illuminated how quickly public favor can pivot. And when Hollywood pivots, it is rarely subtle. Marketing teams quietly pull back. Publicists issue neutral statements, brand partnerships freeze, fans debate, speculate, or defend, while the system recalibrates quietly and efficiently. But that's only half of the story. Major's rise wasn't just about talent, it was about visibility, timing, and narrative positioning. The same mechanisms that elevated him, careful role selection, festival buzz, critical framing, media curation, also determine how swiftly the system abandons you when unpredictability appears. Momentum at this scale is a double-edged sword. Adoration is conditional, opportunity is transactional. The public sees only the marquee, the backstage deals and strategic assessments remain invisible. And here's what's often missed. Power doesn't vanish when scandal surfaces, it reorganizes. Allies who were once vocal go quiet. Silence becomes the industry's tool. Perception management takes over. Major's trajectory shows a hidden dynamic in modern fame. Momentum is measured in public attention, but vulnerability is measured in private calculation. Every move he made, every appearance, every statement during interviews or press tours was now being read through a new lens. Risk. The same momentum that created inevitability now made his collapse visible and unavoidable. Hollywood doesn't just accelerate careers, it intensifies scrutiny in proportion. The higher you rise, the less margin for nuance exists. Small missteps aren't contained, they are amplified. And when you are someone positioned as the future of billion-dollar franchises, amplification becomes inevitable. This is the collision every rising star faces, especially those elevated not just by talent, but by carefully engineered momentum. Jonathan Majors' story isn't just about an arrest or allegations, it's about what happens when someone moves too fast, is invested in too deeply, and suddenly exists in a system that measures their value in risk, not art. And when the system recalibrates, it's ruthless. The courtroom isn't a stage, but for someone like Jonathan Majors, it becomes one anyway. Every camera flash, every published report, every social media thread, they aren't just documenting events, they're reshaping perception. And in Hollywood, perception can be more dangerous than reality. Once allegations surfaced, momentum didn't just slow, it inverted. The industry that had once curated his image suddenly began distancing itself. Brands went quiet, studios paused announcements, collaborators reassessed public associations. Support doesn't vanish because people are cruel. It vanishes because risk is measured, and in high-stakes entertainment, risk carries a price tag. Major's rise had been a bet, a carefully managed narrative built on skill, timing, and projected cultural impact. His public misstep turned that investment into uncertainty. And uncertainty is a currency Hollywood hoards against. This is the reality of structural power in celebrity culture. The higher you are, the faster the narrative can pivot. Allegations don't just stain reputations, they change the calculus of opportunity, influence, and proximity. For Majors, the legal process was both literal and symbolic. It wasn't just about guilt or innocence, it was about who controlled the story, who determined access, who decided whether his career momentum continued or stalled. The courtrooms had amplified dynamics that had been silently shaping his rise: control, leverage, and perception. Public attention became a lens through which every action was interpreted, sometimes amplified, sometimes distorted, but always consequential. In modern Hollywood, allegations against a young, high-profile actor are never isolated. They ripple through franchises, marketing campaigns, and audience expectations. The system that once elevated someone quickly recalibrates to minimize collateral risk. That's why silence in the aftermath of scandals is never accidental. Fans debated online, commentators dissected each appearance, media outlets recycled narratives with surgical efficiency, and Majors, once framed as inevitable, became framed as unpredictable. That unpredictability is what triggers the industry's defensive mechanisms. Contracts get rewritten, roles get recast, strategic alliances shift quietly. Momentum doesn't just accelerate careers, it magnifies fragility. And once fragility enters the public record, it becomes a tool, sometimes for caution, sometimes for control. Major's legal troubles revealed a larger truth about Hollywood. Success isn't only about talent, it's about alignment with timing, image, and system incentives. When alignment falters, even the most promising careers can teeter. The machinery that propels stars upward is the same machinery that recalibrates when the cost of uncertainty rises. And while the headlines focus on one individual, the structural reality behind them rarely changes. Perception is managed, risk is calculated, exposure is leveraged. The public sees scandal, the industry sees liability, and momentum, the very force that created him, can turn against him almost instantly. Jonathan Majors' story isn't just about personal missteps or legal drama, it's about how modern fame operates at the intersection of performance, perception, and control. And it's a cautionary tale. The higher you rise, the faster the narrative can pivot. The more attention you command, the more fragile your position becomes. Because in Hollywood, inevitability is never guaranteed. It can be engineered, it can be celebrated, but when uncertainty enters, even carefully constructed momentum can unravel, fast, quietly, and irreversibly.